It's the 90th Annual Academy Awards, and Stella and I have watched all the nominated films. So you don't have to. I don't know. You should probably watch
Yeah, please watch them.
some
Don't
of
not.
these movies. Anyway, we're going to talk about those who have been honored by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences in a special 9-part series. The next 3 episodes are about the categories that either make or break your Oscar picks. The first is all about design, costume, makeup and hair, and production. We'll tell you what you need to know and who we'd like to win. You probably already know who won because you live in the future. But don't worry, this isn't really about the contest. It's about the craft. So let's talk about costume design. The first nominated film is Beauty and the Beast. It's Jacqueline Duran. She's been nominated 6 times. She has 1 win. She won for Anna Karenina. She has said about it, the design that she had to do, if I had to reproduce the dress, she's talking about the yellow dress, the iconic yellow dress.
Ball gown.
It would have been a terrible costume because it is really quite simply drawn. It shows how genius that original was. So yeah, bringing everything to life. And we're just talking about the costumes again, from the animated film, making it new and unique and textured.
Emma Watson also talked about updating Belle's garments so that she has pants.
Right, we're in a little bit more of a feminist world than we were in the 90s, which is interesting. Or at least the actress that was cast in the role, that was her focus. Yeah.
It also doesn't let her just fall in love with the Beast and, Stockholm Syndrome. She fights it.
Yeah, but that's a story. That's not really that doesn't have to do as much with the costumes.
My point is that you have a beautiful story that you're watching, and you have this really strong and intelligent woman who finds the humanity in this other being and falls in love with the humanity despite the fact that it was so hard to find.
Sure. I mean, overall...
That's the whole point. And then you have it in today's stance where Emma Watson found it more... found it better in a feminist light, I suppose. Just because then it allowed her to still be the same strong, smart woman without sacrificing anything. Whereas if you watch the original animated one, you kind of feel like she did.
Sure, I think the challenge overall, when it comes to every aspect of this film, was to take something that was a cartoon and 2-dimensional and change it into something that was more believable for human beings to act out.
Like the costumes for Lumiere and Cogsworth. How do you come up with those? Like, what are you actually going to make them look? They did look way more French than in the movie, the animated movie.
When they're turned back into people?
Yeah.
Okay, I gotcha. Yeah, I mean the costumes. She had a unique challenge of the same thing as every aspect of that movie. And then we had Darkest Hour. This is also Jacqueline Duran.
Really good.
She actually went to Henry Poole and Company, Turnbull and Asser, and Locke and Company hatters, who provided original fabric, shirts, and hats especially made for Churchill. So a lot of what Gary Oldman was wearing in that movie were actually Churchill originals.
Well, they were crafted by the same peoples in a sense.
Well, they were made for Churchill.
No, I understand that, but my point is you can't have... I don't think he had the same craftsman making the same clothes for Gary Oldman, who is not the same body type at all.
Sure.
If you look at any of the behind the scenes stuff, they do talk about how his structure is so different, and the great challenge is to make him have that classic silhouette. Like, how do you actually make him do that other than giving him a cigar and hat?
Well, absolutely, and I think she just went back to the actual
Staples.
source and did a great job of making it look as much like Winston Churchill as possible, and then of course all the other people being costume in their costumes as well. So that was The Darkest Hour. And then Phantom Thread. This was Mark Bridges. He's been nominated 3 times. He won 1 time for the artist. Bridges called designing these costumes method designing, because in addition to it being a period piece, many of his costumes were supposed to have been designed by Reynolds Woodcock, which is the character Daniel Day-Lewis played. And Day-Lewis actually chose some of the fabric and elements of design himself, which is kind of interesting.
Of course he did. He's a control freak.
But he was method acting with the method designing. This was an interesting one because, yeah, you have to costume everybody in the movie, but then
You have a costumer costuming.
this is about a person that designs outfits, and so you had to design those outfits to stand out from the other costumes.
Which is a unique challenge in that you have to make everyone look wonderful, and then you have to make someone look extraordinary.
Right.
You're trying to make people who would be going to the Oscars all the time look like that.
Sure. Yeah, basically. And then you have The Shape of Water, which is Luis Sequeira. This is his first nomination. The costumes are designed for a period piece that is more fantasy than history in this situation.
I agree.
Yeah.
I liked it. I do feel like the costumes definitely helped submerge me into the world that Del Toro was trying to create and successfully did.
Yeah, it's interesting because there are some brutal, realistic moments in that movie, but overall, it's like mainly what you're talking about is like the 1950s that didn't actually exist. You know, the one that they talk about on television.
The alternate universe.
When America was great.
Right.
But it's a fantasy.
And everyone was unique. Everyone had their own personal style.
Sure.
I think that's one of the things that Beauty and the Beast, for instance, lacked, because they were all kind of aristocratic except for Belle and her father, which even with Belle's costume, it was so much more different than it originally was. So I don't know.
One of the challenges Luis had also was that he had to create the fantasy sequence with that gown. So it was kind of doing anything with Del Toro. You're working with the whole art department that's got to be, so creative and come up with so many original and interesting things. And then you have Victoria and Abdul.
Wonderful.
Let's see. Let me make that name a little bigger because it's really small. Consolata Boyle, I think is how you pronounce her name. She's had 3 nominations. Interestingly enough, so this is about an aging Queen Victoria. She is also costumed Queen Elizabeth II when she did the Queen, which was one of her nominations before.
She's going for that British royalty, evidently.
Right, and what's interesting about the way Queen Victoria dressed, especially in her old age, was that she kind of encrusted herself with jewels.
Refinement.
Very much so. And then, of course, she had the costumes in Victoria for Abdul as well. And Abdul starts off, the first time you see him, when the first time the Queen sees him,
yes,
he's wearing like a cartoony, over-the-top comedy outfit. And then...
Well, I don't know if it's comedy. I think it's archetypical.
Right,
is that the way to
but it's not
pronounce
something
that?
They would actually wear in India. It's like what the Brits...
It's a cartoon drawing of it, like a political drawing of, this is how I can quickly identify it so you know who I'm talking about.
Right. And
it's like Aladdin except guard.
Right, and just like Aladdin, you've got this guy who's hanging out with a royalty, and he goes from a beggar to being an equal, and so he had to...
In a different sense, but yeah, he doesn't necessarily sleep with her.
Wow, he's up on that one. But
even though he's married,
he becomes
confidant.
He becomes more aristocratic as the film goes on.
Well, in stature, I think he himself.
In costume. That's what we're talking about, is the costumes. So, what was your favorite of those 5, Stella?
Phantom Thread.
Yeah.
I think it had, due to the fact that it had to focus so much on the costume, I think it made it so much more important. Just like some of the other movies where it focused on one aspect and it became so heavily ingrained into the film that it definitely outshone more, rather than it's just a set piece.
Right. With Phantom Thread, every costume that he made had to
tell a story,
excuse his behavior. He acts that way because he's a brilliant designer, and if they had a dress that he made that was stupid looking, then you wouldn't excuse his behavior when you're watching the film. And every one of them kind of accomplishes and pulls it off. You want him to design the next dress. And I don't care about dress designs, but yeah, I think, and I would guess that's probably the biggest favorite. Is that the case, Stella?
I can find out right now.
Looking it up. She's looking it up on her phone.
Yes, it is.
There it is.
Followed by Beauty and the Beast, Shape of Water. Phantom Thread is also getting the popular bets for once, so It is the front runner and getting the popular bet.
Yeah, I think it just makes the most sense. It's kind of an on-the-nose nomination. So makeup and hairstyling. This is an interesting category because there are two that were very much, the makeup all comes down to two specific faces. I guess they all kind of did, but they had to accomplish different things. So Darkest Hour, and this is a kind of a large department, is Kazuhiro Tsuji, David you read them. David Malinowski.
I can't even see them to read them.
Malinowski. That's it. David Malinowski. There we go. That's not a hard one.
Malala. It was done by Malala.
I attacked it pretty viciously because I thought it would be an easy one, and just the consonants in the middle kind of screwed me up. And then Lucy Shibik. For Suji, this is 3 nominations. For Malinowski, this is his first. And for Shibik, this is the first. I'm sorry, David Malinowski and Lucy Shibik, so her first. The big thing here is that they had to transform Gary Oldman into Winston Churchill without hiding his performance.
And it was fantastic. Part of me actually didn't like the makeup because I could see Gary so easily, and I know it was for a purpose. I know it was because so you can see his acting and see his performance, so that you can tell who it is. But my problem is that it just didn't look like I couldn't fall for the fact that he was Winston Churchill so easily.
I don't know. It's he had pores on his cheeks. He had the jowls look like flesh.
I didn't say the makeup was bad. I think the makeup is phenomenal and deserves a nomination. I'm just saying that
because you could see his eyes.
His eyes and it's his eyes and his mouth. If
he had just worn some sunglasses too, you would have liked it.
Why are you a jerk? I'm just saying that when I look, I'm looking straight into his eyes, and I see Gary Oldman. I don't see Winston Churchill. His performance, however, pulled it off for me, and I think he did everything else fine. But if I'm looking at him, makeup and hairstyle wise, I saw too much Gary Oldman.
Well, I think that's good because he had to strike a balance between it being a prop and it being makeup. You know, you don't want it to be a spectacle. But it is in a way, but it's amazing. It looks like he's put on weight. It just looks like
that's it too. Like you're trying to have him do this performance of somebody that's larger than life, and you need him to be believable. And I couldn't fully commit because of it.
I think it could fool you when you look at still frames that it wasn't Gary Oldman.
Oh, probably, yeah.
And then you have Victoria and Abdul, which is Arjun Tutin. And this was interesting because basically they had to, on Judi Dench's face, had to make her look like she was like worn
aging
down and sad and at the beginning, and then they had to literally put life back into her face, like put color back into her face and have her come back to life. That was really their challenge.
And then also age her on top of her age.
There's also a character that gets very ill, and they had to make that character look ill. It's kind of those were really the challenges for that film. And then you have Wonder, which was Daniel Phillips and Lou Shepard, and they had to give Jacob Tremblay features from Treacher Collins syndrome. And I might actually have these names switched between Victoria and Abdul and Wonder, just looking at how I wrote it down. But anyway, giving Jacob Tremblay the features.
And consistency. See, now this is where I actually really like it because I can see the actor, but I can also believe everything that's happening with his face.
Well, it's funny because you kind of forget what Jacob Tremblay looks like when you
Isn't
watch
that the purpose?
Movie.
Aren't you supposed to?
I'm a big fan of his from Room, of course, and I'll watch anything he's in, which is why I wanted to watch Wonder even before it was nominated. But yeah, you forget what he looks like completely, and then you're watching the behind-the-scenes features, and you're like, "Oh yeah, that's what he looks like." He's a really cute kid, and it's the central important part of the story. They could have done it without any makeup and pretended that, you know, he had. I mean, if that's what you would do on stage sometimes in a play, if you're doing the Elephant Man, you just move you just change the way you move, but it doesn't work in a film.
I don't think it doesn't, because if you have the ability and resources to do this, then you probably should, even to a small degree, because you need to have something there to anchor you down. As an actor, that's what I would like to believe, is that the more things you have to help you anchor and to really get into your role, the better.
Sure. So I think they really sold it. What was your favorite of those three, Stella?
Wonder.
Wonder, really interesting. I like Darkest Hours makeup the best.
Yeah, I can tell. You fought me on it.
Well, yeah, because I don't think hiding Gary Oldman's face is the key.
I didn't say. It was just too much Gary Oldman. Okay, I love Gary Oldman. Not as Sirius Black, but I love Gary Oldman.
You don't want to cripple his performance. What's the Vegas favorite, Stella, for makeup and hairstyling?
For the record, if he's such a great actor, it wouldn't cripple his performance. Right now, it's Darkest Hour, and he's also. That is also the popular bet for Darkest Hour, followed by Wonder, and then Victoria and Abdul, which sounds pretty appropriate to me.
Yeah, I think that comment you made is interesting. We should see if Shia LaBeouf can actually act with that bag on his head. Production design.
It's different. It's a bag.
So this is, of course, mainly about like the set, decoration, things like that, and of course props. So we have Beauty and the Beast. That's Katie Spencer and Sarah Greenwood. They're also nominated for Darkest Hour. They have 6 nominations as a team and no nominations not as a team. So this is 17.
So always work together.
This is 1740 France for the village of Villeneuve, and then Rococo styles for the Beast's castle, and reproducing things like the library and the ballroom, all these iconic scenes, and making them more visceral. Yeah.
Which one are we focusing on again?
Production design.
I know which one.
Beauty and the Beast.
Thank you. Okay.
We lost her, folks.
I was looking at the other titles. I think it's hard for me to really appreciate the set design on Beauty and the Beast only because of my background on the animated feature. Because you do kind of fall in love with the way the animated feature is and how simple it is, even though it's a background. I think they did a wonderful job of changing everything from while Beast is Beast to the very end of the film and how it transforms into the beautiful grand castle that it is. I also felt it was really ostentatious, which is fitting the character.
I think it's more influenced by the Broadway show, and I think that's something a lot of people don't talk about. It didn't just go from a cartoon to a live action film. This one had a Broadway musical in the middle.
For years.
It really felt like a Broadway musical more than a Disney cartoon come to life. Blade Runner 2049. This is Dennis Gassner and Alessandra Querzola, yeah. Gassner has 6 nominations, 1 win, and this is the first nomination for Querzola. This is sort of like brutalism in the city with angular buildings and then Romanesque, like lust in Vegas.
I think it was wonderful. I loved it. Having watched the original Blade Runner and then going to watch that one, I think it nailed it on the head as far as recreating the same ambiance and feel of dystopianness.
Plus, I think the technology feels like it came along 30 more years.
Yeah, you could naturally see that being the next progression. Like, this is where we're going to be.
Right, this would be when Harrison Ford is older. You know.
In front of the big woman's mouth, making an O.
I mean, it does definitely, yeah, and that's what's cool, too, is that you also see what the world looked like before the big collapse of the economy in a different way than you did in the first one. Yeah. I think they set up the world very nicely in this.
It allowed you to be immersed, even though they cut away from the actual cityscape and going into the countryside, which I don't think we saw in the first movie.
No, that takes place a little bit,
but this is actually like what is happening outside of the city. What do other people do that are sustaining everyone that are still on Earth? And
the farm,
it's still
the worm farm, and
it still sells you on it, and what they're doing on the farm still sells you on it.
Right, and yet it feels like the first movie lent itself. Yeah, it didn't just borrow everything from the first movie,
which would be boring,
and they didn't throw it away. They took the spirit of it with the boiling eggs and making it boiling rice with garlic.
Was it? I thought it was more boiling eggs.
I don't know. He was making rice. He's talked about garlic in it.
Oh, that's right.
I don't know exactly what it was, but Darkest Hour, of course, is Katie Spencer and Sarah Greenwood again. 1940s London with a slight flourish, underground tunnels and war rooms. They talk a lot about how they had to make the city look dirtier, which is interesting. To me, it just looked like it was wet.
I mean, it's wet all the time there. I mean, that's kind of their 50% way of being is wet.
It's funny because watching it, I felt what a privilege to see all these beautiful buildings, and they didn't really film too often on the actual locations they filmed in.
Well, there's lots of restrictions depending on where your location is.
Right, but it really felt like they were those locations. It felt like it felt like those were the real war rooms, and they had recreated it to look just like the real war room.
They talk about it too, and saying that they made thousands of photos probably of just trying to recreate that. Even the pins on the map are right.
Right. It's really interesting and very detailed recreation of that time. Dunkirk is another recreation.
Of the same time.
Same time. It's a great double feature, by the way. Gary Fettis and Nathan Crawley. Fettis has 4 nominations, 2 with Crawley. Crawley has 2 additional nominations without Fettis, so 4 nominations apiece. They added 500 feet to the mole, which is the narrow pier that had to extend into the water.
Oh.
It also had to withstand the ocean, which is something that you don't typically have to worry about when you're building a set.
Well, that depends. If you're building a set with the ocean, yes, every time.
Right. And
Jaws.
They reused a lot of the same ships over and over again and repurposed them so that they could make it look like they had a bigger fleet because they didn't have as many boats as they
the civilian ships, yeah.
So that was a really interesting art direction.
I appreciated that because there are different areas you focus on, different characters you're going to focus on. Some of them you can't really do much with. What are you going to do in a plane? You kind of have the character there. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can't really do anything with that.
But they had to create the plane, and they had to do, like, a lot of the stuff in the planes are real plane shots, and some of them they're, up on a cliff.
Well, my point is that you have the civilian boat you follow, and then you have the plane. There's not much that's going to change in there. It's once it's set on its journey, it's going to be there. But then you have everyone that's on the beach and traveling from there to the beach or existing on the beach trying to survive. I think that gave it its own flavor. It's also really hard to talk about because of the way it's edited. So I mean, otherwise, I think the production was great. Sure.
Whenever you work with Christopher Nolan, you have certain challenges too. He's a visionary filmmaker that likes to use the latest technology and invent things for it. So just the way that they filmed it was kind of a challenge. And
right.
Everything, like the casting of all the extras, they cast all brunettes so that they all look the same. So that if you rescue one of the people off the beach, you rescue them all, kind of that mentality. So Christopher Nolan, it's got to be difficult to make him happy on set with your art direction.
I don't know, just ask Christian Bale.
Well, he didn't have to do art direction. He just had to go, oh, I'm Batman. The Shape of Water. This is Jeffrey A. Melvin, Shane Veal, and Paul D. Osterberry. Melvin's first nomination, View's first nomination, Osterberry's first nomination. This is sort of a brutalistic fantasy noir. One of the things I thought was interesting, I didn't really realize that Del Toro uses almost a totally different team for every movie. I thought that he had a team that did Del Toro style films with him, and
No.
But these are like, he goes to a different person for all these things.
Right, because even though his aesthetic is relatively the same in his theme arsenal, it's different. They're all different. They're all in different lighting. They're all in different areas, and I loved it. The Shape of Water is going to be one of my favorite movies, and I think every aspect of it, no matter what they're casting, is great. I think it was all well thought out.
Yeah, I think the way that that Del Toro approaches these things keeps him from being Tim Burton, where everything looks like the same Tim Burton movie over and over again.
Yeah, that's why I say theme, not, world.
Yeah, but what's nice is that he has a sterile... Okay, it's not sterile. That's the cool thing. I think he's got this futuristic lab, and it's like, it's dirty.
Well, it's used. You can tell that that's something that they've tried and then failed, tried again, failed, repurposing.
But usually the future is clean in movies.
Stark.
And they made it very, like, grungy and dirty. And then, of course, you have the...
Well, it also takes place in, like, an earlier time, too. It's the past.
Yeah, but
that's part of the thing to make it the past.
But it's so easy to make that scientific lab just look like it's,
yes
a
and no.
hospital, basically. And then, going back, really, it's great because the movie theater is such an important character, and the diner and, all these places, they're so memorable. So what was your favorite production design, Stella?
Blade Runner, followed closely by Shape of Water. I love Blade Runner because, as much as I love Shape of Water, I fell in love with the story and I fell in love with the characters. But Blade Runner sold me on this world.
Yeah, Blade Runner for me too. It's I remember playing a video game before I ever saw the first movie that was a Blade Runner game, and just the atmosphere has to capture you in that way. And I thought it did a great job without reproducing anything. What's the big favorite there, Stella?
Shape of Water looks like it's supposed to win, followed by Blade Runner, but Blade Runner's getting the popular vote right now.
Here's the thing about the Oscars, folks, and it's much more unpredictable than it has been in the past. But usually the technical awards, if you can give it to the thing that might win Best Picture, they'll typically do that. So Blade Runner was not nominated for Best Picture. The Shape of Water was, so it's got an unfair advantage. But if it doesn't win, it deserves the prize. It really does.
Blade Runner definitely deserves it. I love Shape of Water, and I love Del Toro's vision, and I do think his star is finally able to rise and take off, and he will be his own attraction. Just like if you hear a new Spielberg movie's coming out, you kind of want to go see it. When a new Del Toro comes out, you want to go see it.
So tune in next time. You'll learn more of the technical awards. Next time we'll be focusing on the visuals.